This episode is dedicated to Casey Bach, Patrick, Alejandro, and Gregory Lewis, for becoming our newest Southpaw supporters, and helping to make this project possible.
The Southpaw podcast and project is supported entirely by listeners like you. If you want to support the work that we do, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen. Share these episodes, follow us on social media. If you're a new listener, make sure to click subscribe. And if you really want to support this project, then become a paid monthly subscriber on patreon.com/southpawpod. If you head over to Patreon and subscribe for just $4 a month, you will get immediate access to our complete catalog of bonus episodes, videos, and articles. The more supporters we have, the more time we can dedicate to the show, which means more bonuses, such as classic fight commentary, transcripts of interviews, building a liberation martial arts online curriculum, and most important of all, hire and pay for staff. If you can't support us monthly, you can also do one-time donations at ko-fi.com/southpawpod. We also have t-shirts and sweatshirts to not only flex the show, but your own moral compass. By supporting us, you're not only helping us grow, you're also helping us stay and keep this project running. We can't exist without your support. Thank you.
This is Sam.
This is Maurice.
And this is Fight Study.
On today's Fight Study, we have special guest Maurice Shelton here to talk to us about MMA, politics, and Japan. Maurice is an MMA fighter on hiatus. I know you're not officially retired. And though you live in Japan, we still connected because the lefty MMA milieu is small and the lefty BIPOC MMA milieu even smaller. So it was only a matter of time. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Sam. Thank you.
And actually, I don't want to speak for you. You've trained in lots of gyms and all over the world. So what would you say is the left of liberal MMA scene like? Is it big? Is it small? Is it non-existent?
I can put it like this. For those of you that have any anime fans out there, I compare it to walking around like Kinshido and Fist of North Star to find other lefty or like leftist people that are actually leftists and also are like MMA fans or practitioners. So it's been kind of lonely out there because for me, I usually try to qualify people with a few questions when I start to train or I enter a training space. So very rare. It's like once in every, like not even a blue moon that I find people that are like, oh yeah, I agree with your views. So.
What are some of the gyms you've trained in?
I first officially started, well, let's rewind. So I grew up in the South. I grew up in Atlanta. I'm born and raised in the American South. So but boxing was really my first love because everybody around me loved boxing. So I always had a outside dream, like maybe one day I would go join the amateurs and then actually just fight for a living. I always would talk about it, but I was one of those guys too chicken shit to actually do it until I moved to Japan. But I had dabbled at boxing gyms in Washington, D.C. I think I went to City Boxing. I had trained also at Lloyd Irvin's gym for a short time in the Washington, D.C. area. But work and life got in the way. So I would bounce around. I visited so many gyms. I can't even begin to name how many, but Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gyms, kickboxing gyms, whatever. But when I finally made a life change, I went to Japan the first time in 2010, September of 2010. And I joined a small gym in Yokohama, actually. Very small gym. I visited a couple gyms. One of the gyms I visited first, and it gave me like kind of that my spidey sense was tingling. It was a gym associated with Barrett Yoshida. And the people, when they brought me in, they just wanted to see what I could do. And I just showed them, like, my stand up, and the guy, he was just oohing and on about my jab and my boxing stance. He was like, yeah, you see, of course, like I could feel like you're just this big black guy. Of course you're like really strong at, uh, boxing, but, nobody was really trying to connect with me as like a person first. It was just like, I'm the foreigner first and foremost. I'm big and strong, obviously. I know how to do this stuff because it comes naturally. It's like, you didn't even ask me about my background or anything. So, I didn't join that gym, to say the least. So I ended up joining the gym right, above it, which was like, it's a small gym. It was a feeder gym for, couple local semi-regional, promotions that's associated with, Akira Maeda Rings Network. So, I ended up, training there semi full time. I was still looking for a job. Once I made the decision, after my first fight, I did everything like bass backwards. I had told people that I wanted to train, and I was always a fan of MMA, boxing, kickboxing, you name it, any combat sport. Like if it was on TV or like ESPN or ESPN2 growing up, I wanted to watch, just because I was, physically a small person, not small at heart, but just physically small around a bunch of people that would go on to like NFL or NBA or something like that. So I always had that chip on my shoulder, like kind of a Napoleonic complex. But I ended up just saying, forget it. I'll try it once, because when the circumstances of me going to Japan were, I was just coming to visit. I didn't actually intend on staying, or I didn't have an explicit desire to stay, because Japan, when I first moved, or when I first came here, it was my first time outside the United States. So I ended up joining the gym because the second guy that I had seen, he was very welcoming, and I should have taken that as kind of like a red flag, because it's like there was nobody in there, and he's like, yeah, you can join, like just come on, but I was looking for a place to get back into shape, because the jobs that I was working, right up until the point that I made the decision to visit Japan, required me to work, anywhere from 65 to 85 hours a week. I was working in sales, so I got out of shape, by my own standards. Like some people would see me and say, oh, Maurice, you still look good. You're a young guy, you're in good shape. I'm like, no, like you should have seen me like 2 years ago. I was, I could walk around with my shirt off with no problem. But, I ended up doing that. And when I say bass backwards, I ended up taking an amateur fight, 2 months after I started training for the first time officially. So I had dabbled here and there. I had taken, 5 months off here. I got to go to work, or my schedule doesn't match up. But I had all this knowledge, and I had to like kind of put it together. But, as many of your listeners might already know, like the psychology of actually stepping into the ring there's a big difference between like sparring, training, setting up a training camp, and then actually saying, you know what, I got to get my ass in there and have somebody try to knock my head off. There's a big jump in the motivation and the energy. So for me, I had always had stage fright. I'm an anxious person. Like to this day, I'm anxious. I'm like anxious right now talking. So it was like I can say I was proud of myself in just making the leap, because for I want to say about 7 or 8 years, I had been hesitating to just do it, to just, make the leap and to actually take a chance on myself. Even though, looking back, it was still ill-advised, because I had only really been training seriously for about 6 to 8 weeks. So I actually, and there's a silver lining, or I don't know how you would say there's a reverse of the silver lining in the cloud, so I won my first amateur match, which was probably not a good thing, because it kept me going. So the scout, or the talent scout for the amateur event, they approached the gym manager of my gym and said, hey, why don't we just put this guy in in a pro match like next month. So one amateur match, no experience really with fighting, because when I had joined my boxing gym a few years before that, I only did a little bit of sparring. It was really just to stay in shape and to just stay in the groove of things. I was mainly training solo because I was working on K Street. I would get off of work at like 7:30, sometimes 9. So I would have to go to like the local YMCA to train by myself. And then if I had time, I would join training with other people at the local gym. So getting hit in the face was like still kind of unfamiliar to me. So by the time I got ready for the first match, my first pro match, I was still like, I probably only had like 2 or 3 like live sparring sessions, like hard sparring. So the guy that I fought, he went on to be the one FC champion, one FC welterweight champion. So I was a jobber. They brought me in, and my logic was, I'm going back to America anyway, and nobody will know about this. It'll just be like a cool story. Like, I got in and I actually was a pro fighter for like, a couple of weeks. Like, wow, like, look at me. Went in there and got my block knocked off. I did actually okay, better than I expected, because I thought I was just going to go in there and get demolished. Once all the pre-fight nerves really got to me, I was like, holy shit, like, what am I doing? Like, but then I went in there, I was like, okay, let me go ahead and do this. Like when I walked down, first fight was at Differ Ariake. Yeah, so Differ Ariake got demolished, I think 3 years ago. But a long lineage of like, if anybody out there is listening, like Pride, that are Pride fans, like a long lineage of people that have actually walked that same walk that I did. I'm like, yeah, I shared the same space with like some legends. So I'm like, at least I could say that. But when I went in there, okay, there was a calm, but then there was like kind of a panic that hit me. Okay, like, I'm actually doing this shit. This is ridiculous. What am I doing? So
It's kind of the inverse story that people have when they go to Thailand for Muay Thai, right? Because Thailand is so designed for Western tourists. You train a little bit and then they find you somebody that they know for sure you can beat. And I don't know if they even tell the other person, like, just lose to this guy.
yeah,
But everybody has their, like, I went to Thailand, fought pro, and I won story, right? But in Japan, it's the other way. In Thailand, they find you a jobber, whereas in Japan, you're the jobber.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I think it plays into the dynamics of Thailand now is a client state of Western hegemony. So you have a lot of people that understand the dynamics of Western money coming in through the tourism industry. Whereas with Japan, they do need the tourism money, but they've prided themselves over the past like century and a half. They were an empire. They were the ones that were actually coming in and spending the money and dominating people. We have this thing called Hone and Tatamai, where Japanese people usually don't wear their emotions out on their sleeve. They're very polite, very hospitable, but the ulterior motive, the realness, you get that in the MMA circles. Like, they're not going to really treat you, when it's all said and done, they're not going to treat you like you're above them. You're below them. It depends on who you are, because I'm black. I didn't mention that. Yes. Yeah. For anybody listening to me, if you can't tell by now, I'm black. So some people that are white are, if they appear to be Asian or Asian American, they might have a completely different experience. I can't speak for everybody, but I know from other people that have had these similar experiences as me. They say, well, yeah, you get almost fetishized to the point where you're like kind of like an animal in the zoo, like on display. So it's like they're putting you on a pedestal, but at the same time, they're like kind of confining you. So yeah, you might get a jobber in Japan, but there's another equally or maybe greater chance that you're going to just get your ass whooped. Like they're just going to show you that you can't just come in here because we're the top dogs here and you're just you. Which I think happened to me. That the latter happened to me. So, it's funny that you mentioned, Thailand versus Japan, because Japan, again, like I always tell people, you know, when we start talking about the geopolitics and like Asian identity or like, the hierarchy within like Asian countries or like how people treat foreigners and all that stuff. I'm like, no, man, like, here in East Asia, if you want to call it that, because there's always a delineation between South Asia, Southeast Asia. Like even here in Japan, like you hear Japanese people saying like, oh, Southeast Asia, like those people over there, like I'm like, y'all sound like white people. Like Japanese people are the white people of Asia. Huh. Like, I mean, they have some competition, but for a long time, they were the top economic power. And, that's obviously changed in the past 15 years, 20 years, really, after the bubble popped in the 20th century. So you still have people that hold on to the belief that they're still number one, except for those white folks over there, like in America or like maybe Europe. And those people that come here, they oftentimes do get elevated to a privileged position. And that's in the fight world. That's in the entertainment world as well. And I'm an English teacher as well. So you see it same thing in English education. I've been rejected. I've actually interviewed for jobs. We did a phone interview and they got my my resume and my email and all that stuff. We corresponded for a couple of weeks and then we actually meet face to face. When they saw me, they're like, wait a minute, you're not what we thought. And thank you for your time. We'll call you. Like, don't call us. We'll call you,
Oftentimes you'll see people, regardless of what their political strain is, they might even be on the left, say that white people can face racism depending on where they are on the planet. And a point you're making, maybe indirectly, when you're talking about anti-blackness, is there's also white supremacy, the other side of that anti-blackness coin, right?
Yes.
And so having seen this also in Korea and speaking to my diverse group of Asian friends that I have, right? Wherever they're from, they all say the same thing about how when white people come, they're privileged above other foreigners. I can't say for sure they're privileged above their own people, but there's no place on earth that they're going to face racism, right? They're always going to have a certain amount of privilege. And if you go back to historical contexts, like with Cuba or Vietnam or Philippines, it actually reinforces colorism because wherever white tourists go, they often use the lightest skinned person to be their compradors or the people who service them, right?
Exactly.
Then they indirectly get elevated even more. It's because they perceive that, or not even perceive, but from experience, they found that white people like the lighter skinned people more. And then that elevated them because of proximity to whiteness in their own country. So it exacerbated colorism. So ultimately, just as there's anti-blackness that will follow you as a black person wherever you go, the same thing will happen to a white person in reverse. There will be white supremacy wherever they go. They will have a certain privilege wherever they go.
Yeah. And I, obviously I've had these discussions before off camera, off mic. Something that comes up often, in like some of the online groups, like maybe on Facebook or like message boards. And you'll see like, there's a website called like Gaijin Pot or whatever, or Facebook groups, Tokyo Expat Group. Some people, you'll see some white residents of, especially like Tokyo, they'll say, yeah, I got treated badly because I was a white person. But then you get into, especially with Japan, they're notorious for being xenophobic. So, you have all these stories of, people that appear to be white saying, yeah, I was denied, my housing application. I couldn't rent, an apartment here, or, I got harassed, or I got, I was a victim of, some type of bad treatment because I was fill in the blank. So like, and then for me or other, foreigner, or foreign residents of Japan or Tokyo, you like, got to really temper it, because those experiences are valid, but it's like, okay, like how do you, there's always that gray area. Like, how do you draw that line between like, okay, like they hate your ass because you're white, or they hate your ass because you're a foreigner, you know, because if you're a Gaikokujin or Gaijin as they call it, a lot of times we all get lumped into the same basket, you know, in the same box. But there's levels to that shit, you know? And a lot of people that have never had to actually analyze or actually deal with that treatment, they're like, oh, this is what they feel like. Oh my God, it's so racist. It's like, nah, dog, man. Like, no, you different, but you still like can walk into like a building down in Shinagawa, like somewhere, you know, in the Yamanote line, and you know, the cops are not going to stop you and try to like frisk you, you know, like I've been stopped and frisked in the streets of Tokyo before, like several times actually, because I look like I fit the description. It was like, shit, like is this America? Like, you know, like, cause I have dreadlocks, you know, so it's like, yeah, you look dangerous. Like, you're not going to get that, you know, as a white woman, you got other things to fear, you know, cause like, you know, for women, they, you know, it was kind of a controversy last night on social media about, people talking about how safe it is in Tokyo, like during the Olympics. You know, obviously we're in a time of a pandemic, but there's always this argument that, yeah, Japan is such a safe country. You know, women can come here and they can be, you know, they can have relative like peace of mind compared to other big cities around the world. And all these women are chiming up, and they got like 15 stories each, you know, like, yeah, this dude followed me home, or this dude like rubbed up against me on the train. It's like, yeah, that's a different battle that you have to fight. But like, it's not because, you know, like they hate white people. Like, it's that because you're a foreigner first and foremost. It's not anti-white racism. I ain't heard of it. You know, like,
it's nativism.
Yeah, nativism, and that's a direct result of like people being indoctrinated that they're number one over, you know, however long the empire lasted here in Japan. So for me, like I you know, people would ask me like as I went along, like after from my first fight, and then like as I like continued on like professionally as a fighter slash like personality, a public face, whatever. I'm like, yeah, I learned to just embrace being the outsider. You know, I love Outcasts. You know, I'm from Atlanta, so I'm like, yeah, I'm not going. You know, there's different levels to like the types of foreigners that come here. You know, for me, I've always been interested in Japanese culture and Japanese you know, things from an early age. But I never thought I was going to be like like a complete like weeaboo, like someone that's going to try to become Japanese, because I already understood as a black person in America, you know, I'm not going to try to be white. You know, I got to be who I am, because if I chase after an identity that is not me, then I'm probably going to live like a half fulfilled life, and it's probably going to be really shitty. And it's the same thing here. It's like, I'm never going to be Naijin. I'm never going to be Nihonjin. I'm never going to be that person that's on the in group. I'm on the out group, and I'm okay with that. So, and, you know, I had this conversation with a few of my really old friends a few weeks ago. They was like, yo, when did you first know that you were black? You know, it's like, shit, I always knew I was black, man. Like, I can't remember a time when I wasn't black. But for some people from a different socioeconomic class, anti-blackness and anti-black racism and just white supremacy is one of those sneaky amorphous things where you don't even know. It's like it's like a fish not knowing what water is, a fish not knowing that it's wet, you know? You're swimming around and you don't even know that it's actually affecting you and that it's conditioning you to believe a certain thing about you until it's just there. Like, for example, like, you know, the doll test. So anti-blackness for me is seeing the Confederate flag and knowing, like, just deep down, like instinctually, like it's something that, because I already had the talks with my parents, like, okay, you need to watch out for these types of situations. I knew that those people were not for me. And we don't have to have a discussion. So like I would have this argument with like friends of mine that were from the northern part of the United States, or even from from the from the West Coast, they're like, oh yeah, we're not so racist like the Southerners, like, yeah, they're calling black people the N-word and da 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 da. I'm like, nah, man, like, for me, I prefer it that way because, like, guess what? If I'm in a room, like, we vibing and we're listening to like hip hop music and rap and all that stuff, like black culture, we're like, consuming that stuff, and then you just drop the N-bomb in one of the songs and you think this shit is cool, like, I gotta check you because you didn't grow up around black people, so you don't know that a lot of the stuff that you consume and the things that you say are anti-black at its very foundations. Like when you say the word ghetto, oh my God, Maurice, you're so ghetto. Like I would hear that from people that were from outside of the South all the time. Or that certain things, oh, you don't really sound black. I got that from non-black people. I'm like, how do you know what black sounds like? Like there's no one black experience, but because you want to conflate and kind of constrain the identity of what it means to be black in America, like that in and of itself is anti-black. So you get the same thing in Japan where, for example, I've done acting, I've done modeling, and when I have that deja vu moment, I'm like, oh, these Japanese people have been in America, or they've been consuming just like a lot of American media, and they've drank the Kool-Aid, they believe the shit, they believe the lies, the bullshit. There was a couple of jobs that I auditioned for, and they would tell me in the audition, like, we just want you to be more animated. And I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? Because like, I know how to act a little bit, but like, you're trying to make it seem like I'm a caricature of black people. And like, any black folks out there listening, when someone's trying to make you like shuck and or jive, it. It's great movie. If anybody wants a movie recommendation, and watch Robert Townsend's Hollywood Shuffle. It's a great treatise on like the experience of black or African American, or whatever you want to call it, African people that have to deal with the entertainment industry, especially Hollywood, where you have to almost compromise yourself to try to make it. And for me, I've turned down many jobs. I've turned down several opportunities where they wanted me to portray black people in a negative light. I've had fights with the agents where I would tell them, like, I don't have a price, for certain roles. Like, if you want me to be like a terrorist or like a criminal, or a typical, quote unquote, street thug, there's no amount of money that you're going to put on that anyway, even though like with a lot of the structure of the industry here, like you got a lot of people, a lot of middlemen, a lot of people just taking money, profiting off of black identity, black culture, black music, black everything. It's cool to be black until it's not, right? So they need avatars like me who probably not, haven't necessarily had the same experience as someone from another place, but it's all black to them. So they have a genre of music, they just call it black music. So black music could be like just anything, R&B, soul, hip hop, dance, EDM, anything. But it's just, if it has a black face on there, it's good enough for them. So it's one of those things where blackness gets flattened. We get put in a box, and that in that and of itself, you're not allowed to just be a person. And I feel that's anti-black because, you're taking away people's personhood. You're just, for me, I am proud to be black, but I'm a person first, right? I'm a black person. That's an integral part of me. But when you see me, I've had this discussion with some of my acquaintances. They're like, oh, I don't see color. They try to, and I have Asian people saying this too. It's like, I don't really judge off of like color. I just see you as a person first. Like, no, that's bullshit. Like, you treat me differently because I'm black, and that's fine. We can be open about that, like, it doesn't have to be a bad thing to be different. But, I think, my experience as someone who used his body, I still use my body as a product, as a commodity. I'm an actor. I've been a model. I've been a fighter. I've shed blood to entertain people. That's pretty much the same. Like, if you're doing a class analysis, it's capitalism 101, man. Like, like somebody's trying to control my means of production, man. Like, a lot of times I don't have control of it. I've had fights over this where I'm like, yo, if I'm going to do this labor, I want to be paid fairly. I want to be treated, like a person first and foremost, but I want to be compensated for my time, but you have a lot of people that think because if I appear that I'm from the global South or that I'm from a marginalized group, that they can take advantage, and it's reflexive. They don't even think about it. It's just like just subconsciously, they're just like, yeah, no, he's black, like we ain't got to pay him that much, almost like kind of like the South Asians or the Southeast Asians that come here to work, Filipinos, like if you get any Filipinos that have lived here in Japan I don't know if you've had them on before, same deal, like in the English teaching world, like automatically, you got plenty of people that are Filipino or Filipino American. They speak English fluently, but they get looked upon as like not quote unquote non-native English speakers. Like, why? Because you're Asian? It was like, no, like you were born and raised in like California, but like, people still looking at you like your English is not as good. Or, it's the same deal for like people that are not Japanese, but appear Asian, Chinese American, Thai, Korean, whatever. Like they come and once people figure out, they get found out like, aha, you're not Japanese. Now we got to treat you this way. It's like, you see, it's like a switch that like turns on or off depending on how you look at it. The customer service, that people get, and there's jokes about it, it's like, yeah, I can speak in Japanese, like fluently. And they're like, yo, like, I didn't understand anything that you said. And they try to speak to me in English, or, like if I'm with Japanese people, or people that appear Asian, like they'll they'll only talk to them, even though I'm like paying the bill, like that type of stuff. I have to check myself as a black person. Like first and foremost, I'm like, yo, did they do that because I'm black or is it because I'm a foreigner? Like sometimes I have to ask myself. But then, if I observe a little bit, I'm like, oh yeah, okay. It's like I have to deal with some Japanese people like white people. I'm like, yeah, I don't know if they're just having a bad day or like they're just thrown off by the fact that not many people that look like me come around. So it's just different. Or it's like, yo, like I actually don't like black people because every black person I've seen in mainstream media are like violent. They're, they're going to steal from me, they're loud or something, whatever negative stereotype you have, I've heard it all, from people. It's like, oh, I thought you were going to be this way because I've only seen people like you on the movie screen or on the TV screen and you're always scary, so.
That's the thing, right? For the US, especially because Hollywood is here, but previous to the US, even Great Britain, one of their cultural exports has been not only colonialism, but this kind of internalized colonialism and this hierarchy of races and white supremacy, right? So in Japan, it sounds like it's a combination of their own nativism mixed with the white supremacy they learned from not just American media, but probably American GIs. They saw like, oh, even with the American military here, there's like a hierarchy, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Because it's not like they have a long history with all of these different races or with black people, right? So it's kind of a heuristic. It's kind of a shortcut. Well, it's not all equal. We can't treat everybody the same.
Yeah.
So let's look at the blueprint the West has created and let's just copy off of that.
Yeah.
And that's why then whiteness, even if they're not as good sometimes, I would even say sometimes they might be elevated. I've seen Asians where like, there's an opposite extreme where sometimes they'll want their kid to marry a white person.
Oh, yeah.
It's like the nativism multiplied by the steroid of whiteness. And now you're going to have this like Uber kid who's the master of the universe, right?
Yeah, like Son Gohan versus Son Goku. Yeah, it's like, yeah, he's half Saiyajin, so he's gonna be like Super Saiyan 2, like faster and stronger. Like, oh my God, yeah. Hey man, I've seen it too.
Then they just learn that hierarchy, and that is why also then whiteness is still, in this universe at least, it becomes the supreme race, right? They also don't have to worry about police violence or mass incarceration like black people do in the US, nor can other countries even replicate this. So the bite isn't even comparable. And so sometimes like white people will go somewhere and they will claim that they face racism when it's more like having been so used to white privilege that not having the same privilege as they've always had is shocking to them.
It's shocking, yes. Yeah, and I think, if those people having those existential crises, you can go one of two ways, or is there several ways you can go? But like the two ways that I've seen the most, like some people just say, oh, I'll just put my head down and I'll be the model guest, so they're the ones that kind of start to gatekeep other people like me. I'll speak up and I'll say, this is wrong. The treat, we should just be people first. Like if I know, for example, I'm trying to start a life here, I shouldn't be treated like I'm a perpetual guest, like I'm always going to be like 1 foot out the door. And then you have the other people that are like, yeah, they sheepdog people, they kind of, I don't want to say that they mollify people like me or mollify, other foreigners, but you have a certain element, I think, especially at least from what I've seen in the foreign community in the Kanto area, like, Tokyo metro area, where they go along to get along and they start to replicate the hierarchies in their home countries. And that kind of serves to, keep the status quo intact, where, you got this, group over here and we're at the top and you just need to know your place in this group too, and if you don't like it, you can leave. There's always that understated, that undercurrent, like, unstated, command there, like, yeah, if you don't like it, you can get out. You can get out this country, like this is America, like, even though we're not in America, um, and yeah, like, I'm glad you mentioned that kind of that fetishization of like white skin, like the pale skin thing is always been kind of like, it's fascinating to me, man. Like, yeah, you have some people that get elevated. It's like, yeah, his mama is, French and his daddy is like, a quarter Czech, and like, but like both of them are like half Japanese. And it's like, yeah, now like they're this super kind of like, they're not quite quote unquote pure Japanese, but they're in another category, like a special category where they're one of the good ones, as long as you can speak in Japanese. And I've had this discussion with my family too. It's like, yeah, like, do you consider people that have only one Japanese parent as Japanese? And, you get a lot of hemming and hawing, because it really does. I mean, it really does depend on the identity or even the color of the other parent, So if the other parent is white, the non-Japanese parent is white, they get a completely different experience. And if the other parent is like black or brown, and I've seen it firsthand, not to talk too much about my own situation, but like, yeah, I've seen it firsthand where, a lot of people they are reluctant to actually face the facts of the matter. They kind of just brush it off and they just say, yeah, it's just, we're all just people first and foremost. But, or they kind of, put people that have mixed heritage into just one box without really analyzing, really getting in there and digging deep. Because it is a painful thing for a lot of children and a lot of people that have come up, like there's a learning curve to like accepting who you are. And if who you are it doesn't match up with the mainstream or like the particular in group of where you are, then, for some people it sucks, I get it. Cause, I've been in that situation where I've been the only black person in the room, in a space that was not for me or for people that look like me. And then I had to come to that slow realization for myself, it hurts less if you go into the situation with your eyes open and you're aware of the fact that you might be going into a hostile space. But for a lot of people, some of my friends, even that identify as black, they're like, no, I didn't know that I couldn't be here or that I wasn't supposed to be this good or, in this position, that's why you get a lot of cases, in academia, of imposter syndrome. You get people like, sideways shading you and like kind of like trying to chop you down because they were conditioned to believe that you're not good enough or that blackness equals like deficiency or it equals poverty or it equals just less than, a lot of black people did not come up that way. For me, I was never taught that I was less than because I was black. I just had to I was taught that I would be treated as such and I had to act accordingly. I had to be sure that people understood that, no, I'm just as good as you, if not better, and you're not going to treat me like that. I'm not going to be a doormat for anybody. And that in my experience, has it's handcuffed me, or it's served to be kind of an obstacle in terms of like, quote unquote, getting ahead in the entertainment industry here. Because you got a lot of people, and the same in America, I'm sure, we have this discussion all the time. Like, I don't like to use the word sellout or anything like that, but like, yeah, if you're willing to like kind of get on camera and be a caricature of yourself, or, kind of do some clown shit, then the hill and the mountain that you have to climb to like get to wherever you're trying to go is probably a little less steep than if you kind of hold firm and try to stay true to who you are, and try to represent people that look like you well, and if you try to maintain your integrity, so it's one of those things. Like, yeah, it's a universal thing, but it's there's differences, definitely.
If you're a square peg, but you're willing to become a round peg to fit into the round hole that they already have cut out, that they already have, envisioned and decided that this is your role as a Black person, then it's going to be a lot easier to fit in there than to insist like, no, I'm not a round peg, I'm a square peg, and I'm going to be true to who I am, right? Then it's going to be resistance.
A note to our loyal listeners: if you love the show, please support us and help us get paid for our labor by joining Team Southpaw on Patreon. By becoming a member, you'll get access to bonus content like exclusive articles, fight previews, bonus episodes, transcripts of fight studies, and access to our private chat group on Discord. But more importantly, you will help us supplement the cost of the show, the incredible time and energy Sam and I put into making the show, and you'll be giving us some breathing room not only to juggle Southpaw with our day jobs, but also expand Southpaw into other areas. Show your Southpaw solidarity by supporting us at patreon.com/southpawpod.
Some people are just lazy, man. Like, I hate to put it, I'm not one to down anybody else's like hustle, whatever. Like, sometimes people just like, yo, fuck it, man. Like, I'm tired. Like, I need to make some money, like.
They're just like, I've been putting in this grind, trying to fight this system for like 5 years. You want me to do that in the commercial? Okay, I'll do it.
Yeah. Some people, I've had a discussion. It's like, yeah, I did it because, it was quick money, and like, if I weren't the person to do it, it was going to be somebody else. So why not just go ahead and do it, And for me, I've had my weak moments or whatever, and there's things that I've maybe, some people could, if you go back, and if anybody's like that interested, I don't think anybody's that interested. You can go back and comb through my history of appearances on like Japanese media. It's like, oh, that's kind of questionable. That's kind of, but yeah, it's tough to be in entertainment. It's tough to be a foreigner in a foreign land, and then also you layer on top of that Blackness, or like any type of like difference, it's going to be that much harder. It's going to be a multiplier, or exponentially harder, So why, you hear some people say, you're a guest, and especially from people that come from colonized lands, like I know people that come from the continent of Africa, I should say, that say, yeah, you just get along to get along, because they've already dealt with, imperialism and colonialism, neo-colonialism. Like, they're familiar with how to just carve out a space for themselves, even though it might not be the ideal situation. They're still surviving in some cases, and in very select cases, some people are thriving. But the majority of people, they're like, we're just trying to get along, and we're not trying to cause any trouble. We're just trying to build a foundation for the next generation. So don't cause trouble. Don't make too much noise.
Well, I've heard that even in the US, I've had Black friends tell me they felt preferential treatment for their other friends who might be Black, but actually from Africa, or Black, but from Jamaica. Even within, anti-Blackness, there's even layers to where you're from, right? There's actually historical stuff even about sports, especially baseball, where a lot of American Black athletes and baseball players pretended to be from Latin America because they got treated better than a Black person from here.
Oh yeah, don't get me started on the historical, background of like trying not to be Black, man.
I'm not Black, I'm Cuban.
Yeah, I'm Cuban, or like I got Indian in my blood, man, or we from Barbados or something like. You could run the gamut, of like trying to obscure being a descendant of enslaved people, it has a long history, like throughout the world, like, yeah, I'm different. I'm outside of that space that is reserved for people that are the foundation or the gristle for the capitalist, like grindstone. It sucks because I've seen it firsthand where people are trying to tokenize themselves because they know like that's probably their best shot at like not having to feel the foot of oppression on their necks. And you see it all the time. It's different iterations of it, but you see it often if you're looking for it, obviously.
It's not going to be one for one, but it does seem to like mechanically work the same way as when Asian Americans look down upon new Asian immigrants as fobs, right? Fresh off the boat. This like this derogatory term to say that they're different from us. So even within this diaspora, we're going to rank each other and we're going to say who's better and who's worse.
Yeah. So off mic, I would have conversations with some of my Asian and Asian American friends, like, because there's so many parallels and there's so many things that we can draw comparisons to within our respective communities. The only way to topple white supremacy and the only way to really affect real change, you got to ally with each other. You have to draw an alliance with each other. You have to understand the commonalities that have oppressed us, both, or, us all, in similar ways, because there's so many through lines that like, they're like completely like, they're almost so intertwined that they're just one through line, like where you can say, okay, the reason why we do this is because this shit happened in China in like 150 years ago, or like, you got the Chinese Exclusion Act, versus like Jim Crow, like in the Black Codes, like all that stuff is connected, man.
We could go back to the start of the colonization of the Americas, right? What was the whole point? What were they trying to find? It was trying to find passage to India and China, right?
Like, where that damn Silk Road at, man? Shit, like, let's bring these black people to try to like make sure we can like exploit even further the world's resources. Yeah, it's and for me, like, people would ask me in these activist groups, and I would do work on the street and trying to do outreach, political education, all that. I'm like, well, you have to know that this song and dance is not new. Like, that's the first step, in terms of like really fighting the good fight. You don't want to fight the same fight over and over again, man, because that's what white supremacy wants you to do. They want you, they want you to waste the energy of people that are oppressed. If you keep them scattered, then they can't mount any like real fight against the things that are oppressing them.
You actually gave a good example of how capitalism is tied to white supremacy, because you as an actor or model, like you said, sometimes you had to do those questionable things just because you were tired or you just needed the money, right? You called it a weak moment, but capitalism will force those weak moments because you need money. So when you need money, then it forces workers and even forces people of color to do things that might go against their own moral code just to survive, right? And so that's why you can't separate white supremacy from capitalism. And that's something that, when you move further to the left, that you understand. And, there's so many different strains within the left. And I would say this is more of like part of the left that is of a probably more Black radical tradition, right? Writers and thinkers like Frantz Fanon or Walter Rodney. I'm not a Black person, but even as a person of color, those are like the people that I looked up to or read, because the other stuff I was reading, I didn't connect with. I was like, this doesn't seem like it explains what I went through. And so reading the other writers and the way they expanded, where it's like, okay, this is how you take Marxism and expand it and use it for yourself to make it apply to you. Then it's like, oh, okay, this is how I make this apply to me, even though my experiences isn't one for one the same as Frantz Fanon, let's say, right? There's a lot of tools and formulas that he's giving out that are more broad-based that I can apply for myself, and also like explaining how there's this like white supremacy, anti-Black spectrum, and I fit in there, right? And we're all trapped in there, and it's all still within the confines of capitalism as well, and that capitalism itself is racialized. So how did you become politicized where you're further out than liberal and got hip to these more radical traditions?
That's a good question, because it's very hard to like pinpoint one moment where I was like, okay, now I'm radicalized.
Were your parents like this radical, or?
Yes and no. So, not to air too much of my dirty laundry, I could say this, like, because of the fact that you just mentioned like one of the kind of key features of like the Black experience in the South. You have a lot of people. You have an overrepresentation in the armed forces of Black Americans, African American, or people that of African descent, because of the fact it still is looked upon as a tool of social mobility. If you look at the Montgomery GI Bill, one of the key factors of creating the middle class in the United States of America was joining the military, getting that VA loan, and getting a base of capital, which is your house, right? And that wasn't accessible to many Black Americans in the 20th century, but it was dangled as a feature of the American dream. And you had some people that could access it through the military. You know, if you moved up the ranks, yeah, you can build some financial stability, and you can create a better life for the next generation, which did happen in my family. You know, where you had people that were career military people, and they built businesses, they built lives for themselves through that. But I think, and I'm sure there are scholars out there that have dissected this more. You know, I've done my own research about like radicalism within the military and within the armed forces. So like I said before, my father was Army, my stepfather was Navy, got a lot of people in my family that were Air Force, a few devil dogs out there, a few Marines. I did some research myself. You know, I had been approached by recruiters when I was in high school. You know, like I knew early on, like before I joined high school, that I didn't want to like kill people. But it was, you know, for those of you that have played like video games, you know, you become desensitized to like on-screen violence, you know. So one of the first wars wars of imperialism I remember is, the excursion in Kuwait and Iraq, you know, and you see the tracer bullets like just flying in the air. It's like glowing green. You see the stuff, and it doesn't look real. Like these people are like dying, you know, on ABC News, you know. I knew deep down something was wrong about it, because my dad would tell me, you know, like when you're talking about like Americans or the American empire, like fooling around in Africa, for example, or like Grenada. You know, I heard about that from my dad. You know, we watched CNN growing up, like, you know, Grenada. I mean, I was just listening to a podcast about Grenada the other day, you know, like, and shout out to my namesake, you know, Shining Jewel, like Maurice, you know, he represented a threat. Maurice Bishop, he represented a threat to American imperialism right at, you know, in the quote unquote backyard of America. So I knew about this stuff because I'm, you know, I was one of those kids. I was a know-it-all. You know, I was a bookworm early on. I started reading when I was like 2 or 3 years old. So I can't say there was a particular moment when I was like, yo, like I need to be on the left. Like I grew up reading like Souls of Black Folk, W.B. Du Bois, John Henry Clark, people that, you know, like Du Bois, you know, was kind of, he moved, you know, he's a full-on communist by the time he died. But like I read some of the early works, and I read some of his later essays, you know, after he broke with the NAACP. I was just having, you know, kind of an argument about his stance on like the talented TIFF. But something always kind of nagged at me when I would join spaces that were talking about like Black empowerment or uplifting the Black people, because, you know, there's the unstated thing that, oh, you know, some Black people don't know any better, or, you know, we have Black on Black crime, where even within our own community, you're pathologizing, you know, Black behavior. And it was like, okay, is it a deficit culture? Is it just because we're Black that we act this way? Or is it some other factor? Like I was always asking that question internally, like, why does it seem like we're the only ones that are dealing with this stuff? And then when I started reading more, like, I want to say like really, you know, it kind of coincided with puberty, man. Like I was like reading a lot of stuff, you know, like James Baldwin, reading like Zora Neale Hurston. I was reading a wide range of things of Black thinkers, Francis Fanon, John Hope Franklin was, he's kind of mainstream, but it's like, yeah, like just knowing the history of people, and starting to draw those comparisons, seeing that, I already knew that I'm going to be to the left. I'm always for the underdog. I remember seeing a picture because I had this, I forget what it was. It was like a Black history, like a survey book or whatever. Maybe it was one of John Hope Franklin's things, but it was one of those things where, when I was like in second grade, we would do like a Black history quiz, right? It was like for Black History Month, we have like a quiz bowl, and I was like quiz bowl champion. Like I would beat everybody in Jeopardy and all that. And I remember seeing this picture. I think I was probably about 7 or 8 years old, and it was a picture of Nat Turner. And it was like it was an illustration of the depiction of when he surrendered to the people that were looking for him after he initiated the uprising in Virginia. And he had a sword, and the white person that was standing across from him, he had a gun. So I was, in my mind, I'm thinking like, yo, why didn't he why didn't he have a gun? Like to fight this white dude that's trying to capture him. Like, why couldn't he like hit him with some crazy like sword move and then like run away? I was thinking, I was creating this narrative from this one picture, and that's when I knew, I'm like, okay, I'm always cheering for the underdog, because I knew I was an underdog. I had been the underdog from day one, from what my parents had taught me. I can say that there was a Black radical tradition in my house. I wouldn't say like, my dad or my mom weren't like card carrying members of like the Black Panther Party or something like that.
Would you say, though, that having so many military people in your family, they became more critical and more aware of American empire then?
I think it's one of those things where if you're in the imperialist court, and you're one of the enactors of state violence, you're going to have a percentage of those people that are going to become disillusioned. And if you go to any VA hospital anywhere in the United States or anywhere where there's a military base in the world, you're going to have some people that got a story about how the military screwed them over. Right. And you see it even, it gets consumed in mainstream media even more, where people coming, they join the military with, PTSS or PTSD. It's like, no, man, like that happened because of the fact that you joined this force of destruction. So for me, shout out to like Robert F. Williams, people that don't know about him. He was a activist back in the 20th century based in North Carolina. He was former military, but he was the other side of the civil rights movement, of the peak of the civil rights movement, where there is a implicit and explicit threat of violence to enable the equality that was promised to all citizens of the United States. So you have a lot of people on the left, or liberals, I should say. They're like, oh, we should really follow Martin Luther King's teachings of peace and nonviolence. It's like, no, man. Like any revolution, anything that when we talk about like a demand, like you can get out on the street and say Black Lives Matter, but like you ain't got no damn demand. Like, what are you doing? You just out there, you got a drum circle, and you're just. This is just a masturbatory like performance. Like, is there a demand for something? You can say, oh, stop Asian hate. Well, how are you gonna stop Asian hate? How are you gonna assert that a Black life matters to somebody? When somebody was saying, okay, we need to get the Voting Rights Act passed, or we need to have a march on Washington, there was criticism for, like, for example, the March on Washington in '63. You got all these people marching on Washington compared to like the January 6th thing that happened this year. Those people were taught to be nonviolent back in 1963, but the sheer mass of people is an implicit threat to the elites. You have to have a threat of violence. Some people, they don't like to talk about that, especially in left circles. They're like, oh, we can just vote our way to freedom, and we can just, kumbaya our way to equality and equity and full rights for all of the citizens. No, man, like Robert F. Williams said, yo, like I'm strapped. Like I'm strapped. And if you come and try to mess with me, then you might get a cap in your face, or you might get slapped up first, but there is always that implicit threat of violence. So you see that in the Black military, where it's like, yo, we got trained. So like the Red Summer was, it's a direct result of that. You got people, Black GIs that were out there fighting for American imperialism or fighting for freedom or whatever. And they come back and they get treated like second-class citizens again. Like, wait a minute, I got full military training, dog. Like, I'm not going to take this. Like, and then the white people see that, like, yo, this person right here knows how to enact violence on the other people. We gotta preempt this, So that's why you had so much racial violence in the Red Summer, right after World War One, where there's a reflexive knowledge amongst people that propagate white supremacy, that they know there's always a fear of reprisal. American history is nothing but a reflex of like fear of reprisal. Someone asked me the other day, like, what type of revolutionary moment in time would you say was had the most effect on you? And I was telling, like, first thing that comes to mind is like Haitian Revolution. A lot of people think, oh, like Haitian Revolution, they might know a couple of names, and like Dessalines or like Toussaint Louverture, but they don't talk about like, okay, what were the aftermath of that, like what happened after that? Like, why did the Louisiana Purchase happen? Why did all these things happen after the fact, or even to this day? Like, a lot of people don't know about the occupation of Haiti later on, like in the 20th century. Like, America was like in there, like they were in there, like troops were like occupying, this island that made the unforgivable sin of like actually winning a war against white people. So for me, and that was a violent revolution. There was armed struggle. People were dying, So I think for me, the military, the milieu of like armed forces are people that I respected or that I looked up to as like the strongest people, like my dad or someone, like even my stepfather, my uncles, grandparents, my granddad, my great grandfather was registered for World War I and World War II. I found out like those people knew how to use a gun, man. And don't pull the thing out unless you plan to bang, right? Don't even aim unless you plan to hit something, like it's there in the background always. So for me, they don't have to talk about it because they knew implicitly they're trained to kill, they're trained to enact violence. And for me, like, I'm not going to go around like slapping people up. You have to politically educate people to get ready to do that type of stuff, to be revolutionary. Because a lot of people are not ready for that. A lot of people are comfortably numb, if you will, like to quote Pink Floyd, So I think there are a lot of contradictions and a lot of tensions there. If you join the military, okay, who are you enacting that violence upon, right? Like, if you're joining the American military, right, you're enacting violence on the global South just by doing that. But some people join not even thinking about that, right? Because that's a feature of capitalism, right? I'm joining because I need to pay my bills, right? I got debt. My mom needs to keep her lights on, or like my sister needs help with her baby or something like that. A lot of people are not seeing beyond like the basic necessities of life when they join the military, and then they can go forward, and progress in terms of like revolutionary politics, something like that. So I think for me, a Black radical tradition can sprout out of those contradictions. So for me, it's a long like indirect answer. I'm like, yeah, there was no real pinpointed like moment in time where I'm like, yeah, like I'm a Black radical. Like I have, I'm a grown man now. I have language for it. But like when I was in a room, so I went to a private school that will remain nameless in Atlanta, or in College Park to be exact. It used to be, and anybody actually listen to it, if they know how to Google, like it used to be the Georgia Military Academy once upon a time, and the first Black graduate that they had was in the 70s. So this was a feeder school for all of those military, like the Citadel, West Point, Air Force Academy, and all that. So you kind of talked about it in the last, one of the last episodes I caught with Avery, where we're talking about like the origins of like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or like the origins of like a lot of martial arts comes out of like a parochialism or out of like a conservative mindset, So imagine like, for me, like even in the Black spaces, people that are military minded, they're still very concerned about the chain of command and hierarchy, and you do as you're told, but flip that, you have people that are white, come from old money. And whenever someone would say that to me in the South, they're like, yo, I come from old money. It's like, okay, where'd that money come from though, man? You don't want to talk about like old money. Like, you ain't new money, you old money. What does that mean? Your money came from damn, enslaving people that look like me, man. Like, so like, shut your ass up. Like those people, as you go on, like people say, oh, you just have to wait for old people to die. It's like, no, man, like these institutions replicate those mindsets. It's the same that you see in combat circles where, oh, I got my lineage from, Helio, Rogelio or something like that. The Gracies from, the Gracies are white folks, man. They're white immigrants that exploited, the locals.
Settlers.
They're settlers. They're settler colonialists. Count Koma Maeda-san is a settler colonialist. It comes from exploiting the global South, that art that you love so much, and you say it's all about like, being equal on the ground and all. Nah, man, like only rich people could do that shit for a certain amount of time, and even when you saw it exported to the United States, it's like, yeah, like these people are like shoulder to shoulder with people that are beating Black and brown people upside the head on the streets, like, there was, I know I might catch some flack for this. And I don't know if you've already talked about it, like, okay, like Gracie Breakdown, like these people are giving clinics to, police officers and military people on how to better restrain, perps and criminals. It's like, if everybody could train like this, and we wouldn't have the countless police shootings, police involved shootings, like people getting shot in the back by the police, like, yeah, if he knew some jujitsu, if he had like like everybody should have a purple belt in jujitsu, man. Like, if you want to be a cop, you should have a college degree and you have purple belt, like nobody would die, man. It's like, nah, man. So you mean to tell me, like, if this dude knows how to pull, like I'm just sitting around minding my business, minding my own Black business, not doing anything. If I get an interaction from a person that can pull me into an omoplata or like a gogo plata and choke me out, like I might not die. Like I still got choked out in the middle of the street, dog. Like, so there's still state violence there, So a lot of people, they tend to ignore the fact that some of the things that are kind of liberatory, or they think that will set them free, are still like rooted in their oppression. One of my fights as someone who is Black, and I like I said before, like that Black radical tradition was always in the background, like, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, a Pan-Africanist view too, an internationalist view, because I'm a Black man, I'm an African and from America in another land that has to fight stereotypes and has to combat, those negative things every day. My fight is also within my own community to kind of make people understand, like, they're in the fight too. Like, no matter if you keep your head down and you just say, I'll be one of the good ones and I'll try to acquiesce to whiteness, or, the Japanese version of whiteness, or what they think that Blackness is, like, you're still in that fight, and you have to be educated on what that fight is. And if you don't, then you're in the way, Same with, like, people would talk about, like, oh, like, did Harriet Tubman, like, she, the quote is like, oh, there were so many people out there that she freed. But there was people out there that didn't know that they were enslaved, that I feel the same way, not to really compare myself to Harriet Tubman, but it's like, yeah, like a lot of times you talk to people, and I'm sure you've seen this too, like in Asian and Asian American circles, where it's like, yeah, like you think you got it good because you have the white picket fence and you have 2.2 children, and like they went to school and they became an engineer or a doctor or whatever. It's like, no, man, like we're not free until we're all free, or that we all can actually partake in society as equals. and equitably, you know. So that's my fight, in terms of like making sure, the tradition of like being educated, of what the struggle has led up to this point, is, you know. So yeah, it's and one of the reasons why I got into MMA and fighting is like, yeah, you know, I think Dr. Horn mentioned it, you know, like there's an egalitarian like factor, right? Like if you good, you good, right? Like people can't take that away from you. Like if you're like with the fights that we just saw in UFC 265, right? To bring it to that, like Cyril, he good, man. Like you could say whatever you want to about like, if Dana White mistreated, Francis, you know, Ngannou. But you can't deny Cyril good, man. He's good. He is good. And like and I could say the same, like, you know, I had my own interactions with a lot of black, like prominent black, mixed martial artists, where it's like, okay, they know they have a limited shelf life. They have to keep their head down and just focus on the craft. So to be someone like, for example, like a Muhammad Ali, to pull your shoulders back and keep your chin up and say, okay, you know, I stand for this while I'm being the best, you know, that shit is hard, right? It's almost unforgivable for some people, because you see it all the time on social media or online, and it's like, oh, I shut up and dribble, right? Or like, why can't they just keep it about the sport, right? It's like, no, man, because a lot of people get into fighting like that look like me, or like that, you know. Okay, so you could, if we want to use an Asian person as an example, Manny Pacquiao, he's, you know, maybe his politics aren't that liberatory, but guess what? He got a whole country on his back, man. And people walk around with their chin up high because of the fact that he beat somebody that is from the global north, if you will. You know, it's like, yeah, like that's our guy, and we can move around. And that psychic motivation is sometimes what people need to like survive, you know. Part of their identity is tied up in the fact that, yeah, like if he can do it, maybe I can too. Maybe I can go out and be a better version of myself. So like for me, even like, I'm like, yeah, you know, I want people to look at me as a source of inspiration, even if I'm not that good of a fighter, you know, like, if I got, you know, a victory is a victory, you know, getting in the ring to me is a victory, because most people can't do the shit, you know. Even if you sit and do the armchair like analysis, like a lot of people that analyze fighting or combat sports have never really like felt that pressure, you know, like getting in there and maybe get humiliated in front of like thousands or millions of people, you know. So to be able to do that is liberatory in and of itself, you know, like somebody like you know, like you know, Muhammad Ali, Jack Johnson, Bojack, you know, like Dr. Horn mentioned someone like a Bojack, or like Jack Johnson, for real, you know, like Joe Louis, you know, like my uncle's named after Joe Louis, because, you know, he's a military guy, but he's a leftist too, you know. One of my kids named Ray, you know, Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Leonard, you know, these people, they represent something to the oppressed, because fighting spirit, you know, it counts for a lot. Hope, you know, it means something for people that have been beaten down by life and by, you know, the systems that oppress us. So when you get into sport, especially combat sport, like to get in there and to show that, yeah, like I am just good at this thing, you know, that affords me that freedom of movement. And that's something that I've always wanted, is like just freedom of movement, man. Like, you know, let me fail as a person first and foremost. You know, like as to be a black person, you know, it's like, oh, you gotta like try to like be the best or be twice as good just to get half as much, you know. Like I got taught that early on. It's like, no, like liberation looks like, yo, I have that freedom to fail. Like if I get in there and I get my ass beat, then so be it, man. Like I'm just another person. But I'm not gonna be restricted in my choices in my life, you know, just because I have a certain amount of melanin in my skin, you know. And I think, yeah, like seeing, you know, I'm conflicted, like when I watch, combat sports, especially like UFC, with people that have like regressive politics, like a Dana White, you know, where it's like, yeah, you know, they're playing, he and like the management, they're playing these people's, hopes and aspirations against one another, because, you know, in the end, it kind of benefits ultimately the company and capital. But you can't take away the fact, like, yeah, like, for example, when Ngannou like finally got Stipe, you know, like his whole country is like cheering, you know, like everybody is cheering, like he got the whole country on his back, you know. You can't take away from that, you know. Same for, you know, now Cyril's in the driver's seat, you know, like people are talking like, oh, he looks like he could be the one to dethrone the king, you know, because they are former training partners.
How do you think they actually match up style wise?
I mean, for my, you know, Dan Cormier mentioned it at the end, you know, of the fight. Once Cyril got the stoppage, I think it's pretty simple. If Cyril can, if he can dictate the pace, he can score. He chops up that front leg, and he doesn't allow Francis to like start going downhill. So if you watch the fight with Rosenstruck, when Ngannou knocked out Rosenstruck in like 25 seconds or 48 seconds, whatever. If you watch the replay in slow mo, Rosenstruck actually he scores a couple of things that, you know, if he actually stood his ground, the fight would have been stretched out. You know, who knows how they were going, but he was backing up. He allowed Francis to just keep going forward to bull forward, and then he gets caught at the end once he runs out of space against the cage. So I think Cyril, he's bigger than Rosenstruck, just heavier and taller. So I think that won't be an issue, but we don't know. The X factor is the mind games, you know, because we don't know what happened as, you know, as training partners when they train together. You know, who was a big brother, you know who, you know, because you know, like if you train, like, you know, there's people in your head sometimes like, yeah, man, he got me, and I gotta try to get him back, or like, or we left off on the wrong foot, like he got me and then he left the gym, like shit, like I want that one back, you know. And that's the honor of like a sportsman too. It's like, you know, they probably won't tell, but, you know, there's a lot of drama behind the scenes that we don't know about, because that happens. You know, you can be very intimate with somebody as a training partner, but still not be friends, but like you still have that respect as fellow practitioners of the sport. So we don't know, like, I mean, I certainly, you know, I don't have any inside information on that. I wish I did. Like, who was actually the big brother on that? Because Cyril Good, man, like I can't really. There's a few holes in his game, you know, but like, you know, same with Francis. Like, there's still some holes in his game, but like, okay, you know, it's same with like Khabib, you know, like people say, oh man, he can't strike, da 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 da. It was like, yo, but and he said it himself. He's like, yo, but you know what's coming, but can you stop it? You know, can you stop? You know what's coming. Can you stop it? And that's the mark of a true, you know, great practitioner of whatever style it is. Like, yo, you already know what I'm about to do, man. So it's up to you to stop it, you know, and I'm going to talk my shit if you can't stop it. So I think, if Cyril, like I said, if he can, the front leg, he has to restrict Francis's movement by chopping up that leg. And he has to watch for the counter, because Francis, you know, I think he did come up as a boxer, but a lot of times, you know, for me, again, like my first love is boxing. I appreciate American style wrestling, like folk style wrestling, like catch wrestling and all that. Like, I think if you combine wrestling and boxing, like good takedown defense, like you have the prototype of a champion. Obviously, you sprinkle in some submission defense, but just don't get taken down, and being able to like take someone down and control their movement, I think is key. Francis obviously is working on that, because, you know, in the rematch with Stipe, I think once he established, yeah, you ain't gonna be able to just lay on me and make me carry my weight and yours. That was the key to open up the chance for the knockout. So I don't know, you know, it's still, you know, Cyril's wrestling. He has submissions, he has wrestling, but it remains to be seen, like that mental game, you know, like once he gets touched, you know, because he hasn't really been touched by somebody with the power of Francis. Because a lot of that stuff goes out the window. You know, the jiu-jitsu saying is like, yeah, a black belt can become like a blue belt with the right punch, right? So I think if Cyril is careful of any counter strikes once he starts to do his thing on the outside, if Francis can actually get on the inside and then maybe tire Cyril out, maybe we can see a real barn burner. But I feel like it could go one or two ways. Like it could be really boring because they know each other all the way, or it could be one of those things where, yeah, Cyril, he's just like, yo, let's go. Like, yeah, mon ami, let's go. And he just chops up Francis's front leg, and then he opens up in the end like he did with my man Black Beast,
Tell me about that. What did you think about Derek Lewis? Do you think he just fought badly, or it was just that Gane was just that much better?
Gane, I think it's both. I think Derek Lewis is what he is, man. Like people knew. I mean, like all the pundits are picking, and I knew it too. Like you saw in the Volkov fight, he had to come from behind and get the knockout, right? Because he's sitting there waiting. I think maybe, again, I don't like to speak on anybody's mental health. I'm pro like going to therapy. I'm pro like sports psychology. When he started poking at his eye, because my first fight, he gave me a flashback when he got hit with the clean punch and he started being like, oh, like it was an eye poke. And then you see the replay, it was like a clean ass punch.
He did that twice in the fight, I noticed too. So the second time I was like, what's going on?
Yeah. So I think, if you look closely, in the break between the first and second rounds, his eye was getting pink. He got caught, I think, with the part of the glove, maybe the corner of the glove, like caught him once he got the punch in there. So I think that was in his head too. So for me, as someone who had vision problems during fighting, I'm like, yo, as soon as you go for my eyes, I'm like, shit, now I'm panicking. So I think that's what happened too, is like a little bit of panic started happening, and he forgot the game plan of like maybe trying to weight Gane out, like where he's going to do his thing on the outside. He's moving like no other heavyweight is moving, like he's moving like, like someone a couple of weight classes smaller, he's moving like a welterweight, he's picking his shots. We know that Lewis is not going to be able to move with him like that. He got to catch him when he gets a little bit tired. He loses a step, because Volkov is doing kind of the same thing. He's picking his shots. He's very long, right? But I think Cyril has that physicality that Volkov didn't have towards the end of the fight, where Lewis rallies for the knockout, because he had scored with the overhand right before, right? So I didn't see that happening for Lewis, unless Cyril just for whatever reason forgot his game plan, or he just got caught with something. So I think from a fundamental standpoint, like, yeah, Cyril sound like it was a bad matchup for Derek Lewis all the way. So like a lot of people saying like, yeah, it's either going to be like Cyril on points or like rally KO like last second, because we already knew, like Derek has already mentioned before, he had back problems. He had some injuries in the past. I'm like, yo, he like me, man. He's just like a bigger, better version of me. And he's like, he got vision problems, he got back problems, so he can't move as much, but he got the power. So if you get touched by it, you already know what's about to happen. So just don't let him touch you, and you can beat him. So I think Cyril, he just poses a bad matchup for anybody, because he's really big and he's just as fast as you. It's just one of those things. Like, yeah, like if you're super big, like you have a mismatch in size, like in the heavyweight division, or maybe you can see it like in the light heavyweight division. Like some people were saying the same thing about Izzy versus Blachowicz. I always mess up his name. Polish Power, man, Jan Blachowicz. Where it's like, okay, like Izzy got the speed advantage, so he can maybe score on points. But like once Jan he nullified the striking, speed and all that, then it was like, okay, now he can just move and bully him, use his size to kind of dominate. Use his wrestling to kind of dominate Izzy. So I think, yeah, Derek, I think this is it for him in terms of like title aspirations, unless somebody gets injured or Dana wants to play games in terms of the interim belts and all that. But like, he's an entertaining fighter. He says the right things to kind of, he gives the red meat to the people who want to listen to like people like being a character and all that, but in terms of like being the guy, I never saw, because even, when he fought Cormier, it was like, yo, if you got a bad back or you got stiff hips and you just got knockout power, when you go against a wrestler, man, it's going to be trouble, and Cormier showed that, same with, if he goes against someone like Stipe has like pretty good wrestling. And I think, this is the next step in evolution in the sport, where you have a guy like Cyril Gane I think he's like what that Hardy dude is. What that football player Hardy. That's what people are looking at now. Like like they thought maybe Hardy would be what Gone is now.
Somebody who started late but very athletic, right? And then will become a natural.
Yeah, because if I saw Cyril on the street, I'm like, yo, he plays football, man. He plays like American football or rugby or something, But then he starts doing, he's like, oh, I'm a savate practitioner, mon ami. It's like, yeah, no, he can move, like he has light feet, but he got the muscle. He has the right combination of fast twitch, slow twitch to impose his weight, but also move away and not be hit, So that's the next evolution. Like all these people that are joining American football or like basketball or like any other sport instead of MMA. No, if the fulcrum of power kind of shifts towards like boxing level of money, like you'll start to see more and more people that look like Cyril Gane than not. I think where you have like just super strong physical guys that actually are technically sound as well.
I think we're going to see that from people from outside of the U.S. because I think if you are within the U.S. and you're big and athletic, you're going to be pulled to other sports. But for somebody like Cyril Gane or where you're from one of these other countries that doesn't have American football, which American football epitomizes bigness and athleticism. But if your country doesn't have that, then MMA actually does look enticing, right?
Yeah. So I think, maybe, who knows like what's going to happen in the future, like next 10, 15 years. But I mean, I think you can see a similar thing that happened in the NBA where you see an explosion of worldwide interest with people that are actually like, they rival the sheer physicality of like the American athletes,
Serbia.
Yeah. If you have that dynamic, maybe it can push that fulcrum of like, okay, where the UFC is only paying like 16% of like its revenue or of its, gross revenue to the fighters, like maybe that number can shift up towards like 50%. And then that's when you can start seeing like even more talented people, the people that might have joined, some big guy from Texas that might have just stayed in American football. Maybe he decides just to do MMA instead. And then that's when you start getting the super duper stars,
Like superheroes, straight up.
Yeah, straight up, like, yeah, out of a comic book, not like people that are super duper flawed, but like we might have, I'm gonna say something and it might get a lot of criticism. People listen. I don't think MMA has had its Michael Jordan moment yet. Some people would argue it's George. Some people could say maybe John Jones or Anderson. I'm like, no, we haven't had that person that unequivocally is like, okay, we could say he's the greatest of all time. No like scandals in terms of like PEDs or any type of like, bad behavior outside of the sporting arena, where he's a global and universally known name, he or she, right? I don't think MMA has had that yet. And I think, yeah, we're getting closer to that. Like once you see people like Cyril pop on the scene.
Yeah. I think Cyril's a good example because you see him starting in his late 20s and he's like that. Then imagine a Cyril who's starting in his teens, right? And we haven't seen that yet, but we got a glimpse of that with him where we're seeing it in the last 10 years of somebody's MMA career from 30s to 40s. So I think this is a good way to end the show. Thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us about your experiences, about your thoughts, talking a little bit about MMA and UFC 265. So tell us where people can find you.
My name is my name. You can find me on Twitter, Maurice Shelton. I'm on Instagram as well, maurice.l.shelton. Yeah. And if you like what you hear, keep listening, I would love to come back on. Thank you for having me, Sam.
All right. Thank you for coming on. And I'll put all your information in the show notes.
Now that's the show. If you enjoyed this episode and find this type of independent media worthwhile, please consider supporting the show on Patreon. We have a lot more episodes like this one in the works, but need your financial support to keep the show running. Even a few dollars a month goes a long way. No one does what we do, and it's all being funded by you, the listener. In return for supporting us, you'll gain access to lots of bonus content along with our private Discord chat. Even if you can't support us, there's a lot of free bonus content there as well. We also have an online store if you want to show your Southpaw solidarity by wearing our swag. You can find all pertinent links at southpawpod.com. And if you can't afford to support the show and still want to help, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen. This makes it easier for others to find us. And don't forget to share your favorite episodes or the podcast itself on social media. Tell your friends. Until next time, goodbye.
Southpaw. Hitting with the left. Southpaw. Sam. Paul. Southpaw. Southpaw.